Neil, hey, congratulations for the House of Darkness.
Thank you very much.
Hey, so let's start off with that obligatory question. Where the original idea came from for House of Darkness with you?
Cool. For me, I wanted to do something a little different. That's often the case when you get to a certain age. You're when you're a man of a certain age, you go, what's I'm gonna, I have things that I like and there's themes that I'm interested in, but how can I do something that's different as well? And so the idea of taking a relationship piece and grafting it into the world of horror felt like an interesting idea. And Dracula was definitely a springboard. I've spent some time with that novel in the past. I adapted it for the stage, and I worked on the Van Helsing series. So I'd spent a little time around that world, and I thought it'd be fun to take those weird sisters that show up in the book and see where they are, in modern times, in a way. Say, or the notion of that of these three people who are they sisters? They live together. They seem to, how old are they really? What's all that fun stuff that an audience can speculate on, and then jump from there was the idea. Like take a bad date and make it worse. That's sort of my job as a writer. What's the worst date I can show you, or the most interesting whatever. So that's kind of how I sit down to tackle these things.
Now, when you use Bram Stoker as an influence, a lot of people will absolutely think of Dracula. How much
Sure.
how much thought did you actually have with the Master of Darkness himself, if you wanted to put him into the story?
Well, they mention a father figure, that there's and so that was where I was kind of leaving people hopefully to go, oh, that must be Dracula, and so you decide. But I like there's this moment where Lucy has this monologue that perhaps you don't expect, where she talks about how she, and when you listen to her, she's either got Stockholm syndrome or because she doesn't look at these people who have turned her into what she is today with any anger. It seems she looks back at the people who originally left her for dead and used her and hurt her, so we assume to be just regular old humans, and it looks back at them with disdain and anger and all that, as someone who has kind of been abused. And so I think that the idea of that being a sympathetic character is a much more interesting thing to me, because I've certainly seen Dracula from all other directions, from the very, very classical, direct adaptation to, again, when I mentioned Van Helsing, we went as far as having a woman play that character. It was a very kind of like androgynous approach, but it was, one of the first times that I can think of that I've seen a woman tackle that role. And that was what I actually was interested in on stage as well. It never happened, but I wanted to do that back then. So I dragged that idea over into, and in fact, I had a female Van Helsing in the adaptation that I did. And so when I heard someone say, "Oh, we're going to make this female version of Van Helsing," I was like, "I'm in. I know what to do." So he was, I can't say front and center, but he's definitely, front of my mind of like, does he show up? Does he not show up? How many references do you make? I like to let an audience think for themselves and imagine things and think, wait, maybe is there a secret here that I'm not in on? Or so I like that sort of stuff. Make the audience work a little bit. So it was definitely a reference without being anything too literal.
Absolutely. Now, Justin Long is incredible in this film, but I do want to know is how did you manage to direct a person? I want to say he is in 100% of the scenes, and it's very dialogue heavy.
Well, you try and give them you're working in a very quick way, almost all nights. It was like 10 out of 11 shooting days were nights. And then the one day that was a day, we were down in a mine shaft. So it felt like night, except that it was freezing cold. So you put a lot and throw all these lines at them. There's a lot of stuff that's on riding on their shoulders. So the best thing you can do by the time you're actually directing is sort of stay out of their way, trust that they're good at what they do, and don't try and tell them what to do, and just shape it, together into what you both see the character being. But just providing as big a cocoon, a nest that they can work in, with the crazy hours and the amount of work you're giving them doing it. The one thing we didn't do, which movies often do, is to throw them out of sync even more by saying, hey, we're going to shoot the beginning last, and all these crazy out of sync ways for an actor to try and piece their character together. Rarely do they get to go from beginning to end. In this case, we tried to shoot almost all in chronology, except for that the piece I mentioned in the mine. That was the last day. That was because that was the day we could get in there. So the reality of movies reared its ugly head and said you have to shoot that on that day. But because it's a very isolated piece, as you may know, it was kind of okay to lift that out and put it aside. But the pieces inside, pulling up to the house, going in the house, all that down to the climax, we tried to shoot, in sequence. So that at least lets an actor go, okay, you know what I just did, how I was just feeling, and now I can move on to the next piece without being yanked around. So if I could do that every movie, that would be the best, because that's the way you work on stage. That's what I'm used to. But movies are all about economics. It's all about what's the cheapest, fastest way we can do it. And I think it's very hard on actors. And so to make them feel as good as you can is sometimes your job. I don't mean to make that sound like babysitting. I mean to make it sound like, like a friend sometimes, just to go, hey, I get it. I know what a pain in the ass this is, but this is why we're doing it that way.
And how challenging was it for you, to balance the lighting throughout the entire movie? I mean, there was a lot of lighting.
Well, if it was me, it wouldn't look as good as it does. It's you hire well. That's the job. As a director, it's casting is that same way, and so is the crew. If you get someone who knows what they're doing, it makes you look good, but also feel good, like you're putting yourself in their hands. I had this wonderful DP named Daniel Katz, who kind of a gentle Irish lilt to his voice, and just really had a can-do attitude, knew the limitations of what he had in terms of crew and equipment, but just kept his cool, and I want to use a lot of candlelight. You can see a lot of candles, and there were a lot of candles that you couldn't see. That person you got to really trust, and so you look at their work and you go, yeah, I like the personality, I like the work. Let's go do this thing. But they're working with the same time and money concerns that everybody else is, and great to have someone who can work under pressure.
Well, let me wrap it up with one last thing with you.
Sure.
With you, Neil, is I always like to ask people who like to do horror, practical or VFX effects stuff. But it seems like you love the practical ones.
Love. You don't get to use them all the time. Here it was completely practical, and I think you can tell the difference. You can always tell the difference, But the funny thing is with CGI, you watch the best of what Marvel can produce. I say Marvel because they tend to use a lot of them and have the money for them. And what always comes into my head is, oh man, those were great effects. Those look really great for being generated on a computer. It's always a qualifier. For that. I love a good practical gooey creature or blood I've never seen CGI blood that matches practical blood. There's so many difficulties that come with it, but in a fairly controlled environment like we had, practical was the way we could go, and it made a huge difference to me.
You've made the absolute best decision. I agree.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think so too. Van Helsing we used maybe 50-50, and the days where it was really gooey were my favorite, and the days where it was going to go off to the painters, it's not as fun.
Well, Neil, it's a pleasure speaking with you. Hopefully I get
Thank
to
you.
do
You
this
too.
again with you. Thank you very
I'd
much.
love to. All right. Thanks. Take
Thank
care.
you.